I made this message for you. For you, for you. You're gonna do great, great, great. You're gonna do great things. You're gonna do great, great, great.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Fiction Forge, the show that amps up your artistic arsenal.
In our last episode, we showed you an awesome technique for making giant eggs from plaster of Paris and balloons.
And in this episode, we're going to be playing around with the technique a bit more to get a sense of what we can do with it besides just making giant fake eggs.
We think these things have quite a bit of potential to be used in all kinds of creative ways.
Starting by showing you how to use this simple process to conjure up some killer custom decor for your home or business.
More specifically though, we'll be showing you how to make a rather snazzy bowl and plant pot.
But expect more cool ideas in the future. For now though, let's get cracking. The first thing we'll need to do is create some of these plaster balloons. And because their chances of survival can vary a bit, we should make a few more than we need just to be safe. They're fairly easy to make. But if you're unsure how, check out our previous video on chocolate dragon eggs where we go into more detail. We'll leave the link in the description below. We don't want our bowl or plant pot to wobble around, so we'll place the balloon on a flat surface just as the plaster starts to set. This should give it a nice flat bottom. Once they've had some time to set, we can start opening them. This is usually pretty fun because the results can vary wildly. Sometimes they pop out with little fuss. Other times they burst and crush the egg. Oh, what? Occasionally they start forming eldritch bluffs. And if the stars are lined up just right, the balloon will pop and leave the plaster egg untouched. However, for a bowl you don't need the whole egg, and with one of our attempts we got a lucky break that left us with just the bit we needed. Once we had a few good sized plaster eggs, we wanted to thicken them up a bit so they wouldn't be so fragile. For the bowl we just poured in some wet plaster and slushed it around till it set. We found when it comes to pouring wet plaster onto dry, you have to move fast because the dry plaster sucks the water right out of the wet plaster in a matter of seconds. For our egg plant pot, we first needed to cut a hole in the top before we could even attempt to thicken it up. Luckily, this was easily done with a craft knife. However, much to our chagrin, it seems this tactic for thickening plaster causes it to crack the outer walls. Wah! This was vexing. It vexed us right in our faces. Fortunately, the same tactic that got us into this mess got us right back out. Some more plaster slushed around inside seemed to fill up the cracks and bind everything back together. Then we just needed to sand the outside smooth. Once they had taken their sweet time to dry thoroughly, we could start shaping them a bit. The idea was to make the plant pot look like a giant bird egg and to give the bowl an abstract vibe. So first we took our giant egg we thickened up and marked off an area slightly above where we wanted it to be, so we have a little bit of room for error. We also gave it some scalloped edges for added egginess. We then used the Dremel to cut the top off the egg, and also for smoothing and shaping the edges. Then we moved on to the bowl, this time giving it a wavy edge. After that, we filled in any external cracks that were left over from when we first sealed the cracks. And then we sanded down the sides one more time to get them ready to be painted, unaware of the challenges this seemingly simple task would throw at us. Our first huge mistake was covering both the plant pot and the bowl in white enamel paint, which on its own is not a bad thing. But after a coat of red spray paint on top of that, it soon became apparent to us that the easy win we were hoping for wasn't happening. It wasn't long before a patch of spray paint had wrinkled up and the enamel had unstuck from the plaster underneath. So, after a mild heart attack, we decided that since it had only affected a small area, we would just clean up the ruined paint and then repaint the bad section. We also cleaned up the base because it had a little bit of schmutz stuck to it. But that also raised up, so we decided to just cut our losses and move on. Armed with our fresh lesson, we carefully cleaned the bowl and then proceeded to spray it with some gunmetal grey spray paint, confident that things would be different this time. But no, we had exactly the same problem again with the paint lifting up. At this point, we figured fluid painting it with acrylic may have been a better option. If you're not familiar with fluid painting and dirty pouring, we also have a video all about that, link in the description below. So after mixing up some paint, we were ready to go. Our second big mistake was that we thought fluid pouring it would generate some nice patterns because of the sloping shape of the bowl, but it soon became clear to us that something wasn't right. We switched up to dirty pouring right at the end, and it was looking better, but by this point I had hardly any paint left. So in the end I gave it a meh plus. We were definitely going to need another crack at it, but while this layer dried, we decided to move on to the plant pot, starting with drilling the drainage holes at the bottom and then waterproofing them with a bit of paint. Since we were going for a giant bird egg look, we decided some speckles were in order. But how does one go about speckling something? Well, it turns out one way is with a sharpened sponge and some black acrylic paint. I just clenched my cheeks and went for it, hey? And much to my surprise, it worked out. Turns out, a tapered sponge is a total boss at creating randomly shaped spots. Then, we figured we would use a thick layer of fiberglass resin on the outside to add strength, water resistance, add vibrance to the colors, and most importantly, seal our pattern in place forever. Fiberglass is great for this sort of thing, but boy does it stink. It smells so bad we didn't dare coat the inside of the pot with it for fear that it would jack up the plant. Oh, well, at least it fortified the new paint blisters that formed. Oh. Thanks a lot, enamel, you jerk. Luckily, a few bumps hardly affects how good this thing's looking. Once the bowl had dried, we were determined to see our ugly duckling grow into a majestic swan. This time we went at the inside of the bowl with a full cup of layered paint and just dirty poured the hell out of it. This time, the paint flowed properly, the blend of colors was on point, and the patterns were tight. Although we definitely could have used a little less paint, or at least some drainage, because it literally took a month for this thing to dry thoroughly. There must be like a 2 centimeter thick bit of paint at the bottom of this guy. It was like waiting for a can of open paint to go solid. When it was just dry enough that it wouldn't sag or rupture when we turned it over, we threw a similar blend of paint together and repainted the bottom. But this time, there was no messing around. We dirty poured it good and proper this time, and soon we could tell that its Meh Plus appearance had just been bumped up to a solid noise. And it dried quickly to boot, unlike the puddle on the other side of the bowl.
2 weeks later.
Once the puddle had completed its life cycle, going from smooshy to rubbery and then finally rock solid, we could finish it off with a layer of clear coat. This stuff is great for protecting acrylic paint. It also brings back the glassy, wet sheen the paint had when it was first poured. Easy does it though. If it starts to puddle, it can form lots of small bubbles, and this obscures your artwork. Lots of light coats is the way to go. You don't want to botch it at the last minute. By now, the smell from the resin had gone from our plant pot, so it was time to add the plant. It's a bromeliad called a flaming sword. How cool is that? Since the planter looks like an egg, we wanted the plant to be reminiscent of a creature of some sort. And this fellow with the red tail-like flower and the stripy leaves was definitely the plant for the job. We added orchid mix till the height was right, and then we carefully placed the flaming sword in its new home, and then we just topped it off with a bit more orchid mix. A little water to help our friend here settle in, and we're all done. Look, we may not be experts, but I think these turned out pretty shell.
They're definitely quite egg-centric, but I would say we passed with frying colors.
Seriously though, that didn't go nearly as smoothly as I thought it would. Sure, the results look cool, but so much weird stuff happened, Jim. Weird stuff!
Yeah, it's pretty unnerving at times, because on the one hand, plaster is a cool material for making cool things. But on the other hand, it can be one confusing, inconsistent mistress.
Hells yeah, I guess we still just a bit ignorant of plaster.
Yes, how droll. I guess we should hatch a plan to learn more. Yes.